Assalamu alaikum, friends of Bookbytes. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce a very exciting new novel by Muhammed Yousuf Minty, based in Cape Town, a debut author. It's called In Search of Who We Are. And it's a fascinating novel in a sense that this is an interrogation of identity and origins, straight up my alley. We've been reading a lot of memoir coming out of COVID, coming out of the pandemic. And this doesn't fall into that category. It's a novel, but it does interrogate our sense of identity, how we question life. And yet it's not a very contemporary novel as well. I would consider it something of a philosophical read. It's the kind of read that writers like Dyer and Guello, but the more sort of Oriental writers have captured in some ways. But this is a story with a deeply African literature kind of stance, as well as having a very spiritual basis. So for Kano, the quest for his child's name can only begin through the ritual of first understanding who he is. As he journeys in search of his own identity and his child's future, he must re-examine his place in the world and the implications for those around him. Set in pre-colonial Africa, Kano must navigate the questions of meaning and identity for the individual, the relationships between individuals, the conflicting interests between groups, and the tensions between individuals and the group. He does so by using his understanding of the history and culture of his people, built on the foundations of duty and compassion. A lot of variables that we can identify with in life, but written in a very compelling way, in search of who we are. And we're going to be speaking to Muhammed Yousuf Minty this evening. Welcome to the show, Mr. Minty. Wonderful to have you. Welcome to Bookbytes.
Assalamu alaikum. Shukran so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I hope we can have a nice discussion over the next couple of minutes, inshallah.
I absolutely think so. Firstly, Mubarak on the book. Congratulations. I hope you've been having a good run since the launch. I believe you had a launch in Cape Town this week with Mr. Shafiq Morton. Also, we had him on our show. He's a well-known journalist. So to get right in, firstly, congratulations. It's a big deal to have a book out there. But tell us about your journey. I love hearing about writer's process. Where did this all begin for you?
Well, this book was actually written like around about 2000. I think, we also coming into the new South Africa, basically. Like we thought in 1994, everything is good. We're on our way. We can now go do whatever it is we have to do. But pretty soon, we started facing some issues in our country, right? I think like social cohesion is a major factor. I think crime. And I think, we have stuff like infrastructure problems and so on and so on. But we're going to see 30 years after the advent of the constitutional democracy that we have, liberal secular democracy, what type of people are we actually producing? Are we producing selfless, caring individual who can put the country or themselves above each other, or are we producing shallow, superficial, vain people, basically, who are only interested in their own agendas? So I think for me, the architecture that we live in, to a great degree, determines the outcomes that we will face as a country and as individuals. And for me, I want to discover, like, how does this architecture actually come into place? Is this the normal state of human beings at all times, or is this just a particular instantiation of a specific type of structural arrangement of society, like as we have in the Constitution, right? So if you look at the Constitution, it's good on paper, but we do live in a world of narratives in modernity, particularly in late modernity. To give you an example, if you look at Blinken making a statement yesterday that the Americans, who has helped the Palestinians more than the Americans? So this narrative is what they push in the media and so on all the time. And unfortunately, this shapes the way we perceive reality and how we slot things into their places. So I want to go to a time before this colonial enterprise or the British and Dutch empires came in here, and to see basically what was actually going on in South Africa or in Africa as a whole prior to colonialism. And then if you do some digging, I mean, there was a whole lot going on here, right? There was civilizations, cultures, governments. I think in Mapungubwe recently they opened up a tomb where they found glass beads from India, porcelain from China, maybe 800 to 1,000 years ago. So I think the idea that we have of the world, or growing up in a colony, the colonial narrative of a dark world which was brought into the light by Western secular liberalism, and yeah, so that's the kind of thing that I want to undermine, because I don't believe that's actually what happened. So I decided to start right at the beginning to give an idea of what was going on here. Obviously, it is fiction, but the underlying principles can be found throughout African culture and all pre-modern cultures. Quite a mouthful.
Yeah, I know. I find it interesting because I mean, this is a very powerful tale that you've told. It's not the kind. It's not a very big book, but it's not the kind of book you want to rush through very quickly, because you might miss some of the greater narrative and the philosophies behind it, the ideologies behind it. So when you talk of a in a way decolonizing the mindset, decolonizing spirituality to maybe re-engage what we are about, our moral dynamic, our moral sense as a people. And like you said very rightly, so this is something we can all identify with, no matter where your background stretches. So using this pre-colonial story to decolonize the mind is actually a very, some could say a very ambitious project, and yet you've accomplished it, because the story will appeal to many. So let's get into the story itself. I want to acknowledge OCAF and the Project Justice Trust for putting their sort of support behind this novel and bringing it out there, because they do a lot of community kind of outreach work with literature. And tell us now, in search of who we are, you've outlined the background. Tell us about the story, your protagonist, and what you've accomplished with the story.
Look, at the end of the day, I needed to address some themes, and I mean, I have a whole lot of a lot of themes which I included in there, like relationship between a husband and wife, your relationship to your family, friends, your relationship with the earth, your relationship with the creator of the heavens and the earth. So I think basically at the end of the day, what the novel seeks to discover for the character, like who is he really? Because he's playing all these roles, obviously in society, but there must be like a center from which every role emerges. So, like for example, for me, I got the role of a father, a brother, a son, this, that, and the other. But there has to be some center from which this role emerges, something that keeps the identity together. So I think this is his search. Obviously, I don't get too much into the book or whatever, but his history is hidden from him. And he has to go and rediscover his history in order to know what kind of future he's going to make for his child. Because I think it's important that if you look at traditional values and cultures, basically, you have to ensure that the next generation is solidly rooted in your morals, values, and culture. So I think this is the trigger for him to go into this journey of exploration, because he now has the realization that it's a generational thing. He's not an individual. Yeah, I think that basically covers the story. I don't know. You're a writer, so I'm sure I can get a bit technical. It's a short book. It's like 40,000 words, more or less. And it's very difficult to create authentic characters in this type of space, because you can't give them a childhood with incidents and so on. So I thought basically what I would do is I would take like a month period, and in that month, start in media res, in the middle of the action, put him into a mission. And basically, as he's exploring himself, so I'm going to fill in the past and the future that he's hoping for. So, yeah, I think this was the process. But Kanu is the main character, but I think like his wife Afua is also a very, very important character. Just to look at the very specific role that women had in pre-colonial society, right? So it was all form and function. Everyone does what they meant to do. So I think this character she has some identity issues, whether she can fit into this new place where she's been married into. And I think like these kind of things is stuff that everybody can relate to, whether you're living in pre-colonial Africa or today. So I think there are universal themes, but I think the reason I set it there is Thomas Sankara said, if you want to find the way future, you want to find the way, you need to dare to invent the future. We're stuck in a system where it seems that we have very little options. One political party really much like the next. It's an architectural issue basically of how the society is structured, the role of money in the society, the role of credentialed authority in the society, how decisions are made in the society. Um, so I think basically, as you say, it's a project, but for me, it's an intergenerational project. I don't think we can actually change our country until we basically rediscover who we are as a people and as individuals.
In many ways, when you read a book like In Search of Who We Are, you spoke about the role of women in the society, and it took me back while I was reading, even though you don't have a reference point for Islam as such. It took me back to the stories we read of the household of the Prophet ﷺ and how women played a part and a role in society there. And also this idea that if we go to studying pre-colonial societies, then the socialist structure was really what kept the society together, strengthened the society, and it was about clan over individual. So maybe speak to us about some of that, if I'm reading it correctly. Speak to us about some of those
Look,
parallels and moving
I
back into maybe a socialist paradigm.
Firstly, I must say that although not mentioned by name, conceptually, Islam is all throughout this book. Because obviously I'm a Muslim, so this is what is it to me. I didn't want to niche the book because I believe basically that there are certain universal values that are held by all pre-modern cultures, which is where we can find this commonality, this Ubuntu, this being together despite our differences. Um, so I think that was one of the issues. Um, I think also if we look at where we're going forward, and I think if you look at socialism as a political system, look, in the modern era, you've had liberalism, socialism, communism, and nationalism. Like these are the three political theories, and I don't think any of them on its own works together. I think you need a mixed political model based on, like for example, if you look at the Islamic model, right? Uh, in the consumer goods market, it's capital, it's controlled capitalism. For example, Umar radiallahu anhu basically was in charge of the market of Medina. You had to write the exam or have a test in terms of trade, in terms of the Sharia, how you allowed to trade before you go onto the market. So the market was very regulated to ensure that there was no cheating and everything was fair. However, other aspects of the society was very communal. Um, so you have, for example, the example I really like to give. I think also more than the systems, I think is the whole outlook of life. For example, right, um, a very interesting legal ruling. I have a farm next to a river. You have a farm next to me. I dig the trench, you continue the trench, and the guy next to you continues the trench. Who has the first right to the water? So the Islamic reading is the one with the first right of to the water is the one who has the greatest need. I think this is quite revolutionary in terms of the way you approach life. In the Western system, it's all about precedent, basically. I think even if you look at the legal system, you've got two mutually exclusive sides. The one side gives a story, the other one gives a story. The judge must decide between the two of them who's right. We know both sides are lying. I think the Islamic system, or even other traditional systems, basically, the person who did the questioning and finding the decision was the judge and his assessors. So they came to the decision, and the decision didn't have to be either this or that. They actually probed to try to find out what actually happens. Then also, basically, the victims of the crime, if it's a crime, they become part of the process. Whereas here, if you're a victim of crime, you're very alienated. And I think that's also one of the big themes in the society, right, which is alienation. So, I mean, it's very challenging as a South African picking a way forward. I think if you look at the Chinese model, it works, but it works for China because they have a 5,000-year-old civilizational culture based on Confucian traditions and so on. We can't blind copy anybody. The way we blind copied the West has left us where we are. We need to go back. We need like political theorists. We need to look at our own history, our own culture, and what we want from this country, and start from scratch and invent a system where human beings are not economic units, but rather the economy serves human beings. I think, in late modernity, which is what we're going through now, What I call the reason at work within capital. It dictates everything. So this reason is not really a capital uh, by itself, because capital is at rest. It does nothing. But the motivation or the intention of the individual or the institution who wields the capital is going to dictate the utility of that capital. And if your only goal is to acquire more, to make more profits, to get more capital, to make more profits, to get more capital, well, you can look at the world with Vanguard and BlackRock and all these mega corporations which really control everything. And then we've got to ask the question, is this really healthy for human society as a whole? And well, in our country, over the last 30 years, we can see this thing is not working for us. So we need to look at some different models.
If we had to use a book like In Search of Who We Are in our syllabus, let teenagers read from the start, because it's a very engaging book, and I find that our new generation, our next generation, seems to be largely apolitical. It's about the political alienation that you speak of, and this idea that individual benefit overrides the benefit of the whole. If we use the novel like In Search of Who We Are to start a discussion at the level of young persons, what would your message be to young readers?
No, I think, first of all, our young readers, unfortunately, they don't know their history, they don't know their past, right? While I was busy writing the novel, like maybe like a month after I had started, I was speaking to one of my friends. He's a young guy. I was living in Costa at the time. That's where I wrote the book. I was a coach of a soccer team in the township called Riachile. Obviously, I built some relationship with some of the guys who used to play with me. I used to invite them home to eat and so on. So this guy became my friend. And, he's a Tswana. So I asked him, tell me about like your history, your culture, your heroes, where you come from, who you are. And he's like, black people don't know anything. White people taught us everything we know. So this is exactly what Steve Biko says. The greatest tools in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So our children, they don't even know who they are, what heritage, where they come from. I think it's important that basically the true history of Africa and its role in human civilization as a whole, this needs to be reinvestigated, and this needs to be brought back into our curriculum. So in much the same way that the Europeans, whether they're from Romania or Hungary or France, they all harken back to the Romans and the Greeks as this foundational culture from which they sprang of civilization and so on. I look at Africa, I mean, we have the pyramids in Egypt, which goes back like 25 dynasties. We have Mali, we have the Congo, but we don't learn any of that. I mean, I don't know if the syllabus has changed now, but I think what is a people? A people are basically their history, which is their shared memory, their language, and their culture. If we don't know our history, there's no way, there's no moving forward. So what happens then is you are sort of floating around, unanchored or untethered. You don't really know who you are. You don't really belong anywhere. You're not part of a great continuum of life that comes from Adam alayhi salam till you, where people have come, thousands of people, so that you could be here today, and you owe some duty and some debt to future generations who will come in your life. No, here it's just like you alone, you're dislocated. Just have fun, man. YOLO, and I don't think this is very healthy for people. It's good for corporations because they can dumb you down and sell you stuff you don't need, and make you think that your validation as a human being comes from like makeup or cars or clothes or houses or whatever you. But really, that's empty. And I think people who've gone through the process of life, they realize at the end that this doesn't really fulfill the needs that you have. Well, for me, from the Islamic perspective, because that need is a primal need to connect with your creator, right? Your fitra is crying out for that all the time. So there's a kind of cognitive dissonance in the society. But I think this has always been the nature of human society. There's been like the elites, and there's been even if you look at the Prophet ﷺ, he came into society. The Quraysh were not against him because they loved their idols. No, he was going to destroy the social structure of society, take them away from their position at the top, and sort of equalize the society. And like what they couldn't take is the slave has to be equal to me. I can't accept this. So this also comes from arrogance. I think, if you look at the South African context right now, even if you're a very conscious African person who's yearning to build an African type society, there is no ecosystem for you to go into. So the only way to get the social validation in society, um, social validation like respect, money, status, it comes from proximity to whiteness, unfortunately. I think it's a bit ludicrous, man, that we like follow the Roman Dutch legal system. Like, these are all just appendages that have been left over. We haven't really been free. There's a book of essays. It's called Empire in the Century, which was written in like 1903. I think one of the things the British thinkers expressed there was that although the conquered peoples don't like our military, they do tend to like our political and judicial systems. So this is the way we'll now control them. And yeah, neoliberalism is exactly that. Eh? You subject yourself to the center, and if you're the periphery, you're a colony. Um, that's what it is. That's why you see the highest Gini coefficient in the world in this country. I think if you look at South Africa, I think more than half the historical gold on the world market come from South Africa. That's a lot of gold. Where's the money? So I think the whole system is bad. Even the political system where you divide your people into factions and groups, each contending with the other for power. How do you build a cohesive society from there? It's like literally impossible because you're making a society where everybody's fighting with everybody else. So where's the center? And if there's no center, then unscrupulous people can manipulate the system to their benefit. I don't have to tell you who's making money in this country. Go look at the business pages and look at the financial results. So who is this benefiting? Certainly not the people. I think I've gone a bit way away from the book. Sorry.
No, but I mean, well shared wisdom, because while you're talking, I'm thinking about how dissociated our youth is and the votership in general. And it must take more than a bag of milli meal and a new t-shirt to sway people in a certain direction, if you know what I'm saying. So it's not only about reconscientizing people, about repoliticizing people with information, and also empowering people with the knowledge of where we come from. In order to re-engage the structures that used to work. I'm not an anti-democratic, I'm not saying take an anti-democratic stance as such, but like you said, an amalgamation of ideas that reaches back into systems that did work, systems that people do belong to very rich cultures that were about a broader perspective of society and engaging people and being more egalitarian in its approach and in its way. So yeah, I really think that we do need more empowerment and more engagement with people so that you have a more less dissociated votership in general. And in Search of Who We Are was very, I mean, I read it over the last 24 hours, and it was very much something that spoke to me in a sense. We rely a lot on our Sufi narratives to learn from. We rely a lot on stories like The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And In Search of Who We Are spoke to me in that sense. This journey to discover and to find yourself and to come back and know that this is who you are. It's really about taking that long-term journey and coming back to yourself, ultimately. In the book, you mentioned 9 different sort of, what do you want to call them, philosophies that fall together. Talk to us about some of those, because that really spoke to me as well.
Yeah, no, so also that, I had to make up like a philosophical system, a thing around which they base their life. It's like I really didn't want to have any like philosophy or whatever in the book, but I got it 1.5 page because it had to be in the book, like for the rest of the story to make sense. It's just some stuff I made up, and it's just like my general reading and so on, and I like figured out basically who am I, what's the components that make me up, and I came up with that kind of story of the numbers, like that's the writers do, right? But there are African philosophies that go very, very deep. Like, even like Ubuntu, Muntu, and then this concept of Untu, the animating spirit. So obviously I didn't want to get too philosophical, but I just wanted to show that these were not uncivilized barbarians. These were people who could think and consider and ponder and think about the nature of reality. I mean, if you look at, for example, I would just divert, the Dogon tribe in West Africa. If you look at their carvings and stuff, if you look at Alpha Centauri, it's not one star; it's a double jewel star system that surrounds each other. So in their paintings from like over 1,000 years ago, they've got this jewel star. So how did they get to this information and knowledge? I think even if you look at the past, if you look at the discovery of a place like Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia in Turkey, which by far predates what they claim were the oldest structures on earth. Then if you look at the Quranic perspective, and you told of all these people who came before, then you go like for me, I ask myself, like even archaeology, right? Just having done some research, and like, it's all narrative, man. It's all narrative to basically as George Orwell said, they control the past. They control the past to control the future, to control the present, to control the future, basically. So even the whole history, like even look at racism. This thing became a big thing the way it is now. Actually, just with the start of colonialism. If you look at Shakespeare in the 16th century, he wrote a book about a black nobleman called Othello in Italy. So this was a norm. But I think that just our lack of knowledge and what's presented to us all the time, I think we must become more critical minded, and I think we can't just accept everything that institutional power pushes to us or the mainstream media pushes to us. We need to be a bit more critical. I think as Muslims, we're very fortunate because we actually have our history recorded. We know that the scientific method began with Ibn al-Haytham. We know Al-Khwarizmi's textbook was for like 800 years the primary textbook on medicine in European universities. We know Fatima al-Zihri started the oldest still running school. We know the university in Timbuktu, it's still there. You can still go and get your degree. And there's like 800,000 manuscripts that haven't been translated. So we know we have this very rich culture, but this culture was deliberately distorted and hidden from us to maintain political and economic benefits. To decolonize ourselves, you've got to start with your mind. You've got to start to reclaim your history. You've got to know who we are. And I would just like to add that for us, for me, being part of a diaspora community, I think this gives me a good vantage point where I can try to be a bit more objective about what's actually going on. And yeah, like you say, this is something we need to do, but I think it's going to be very difficult. And sorry, just one other thing I wanted to comment on. We have this thing that if we criticize the neoliberal model, then we are anti-democratic. I don't necessarily believe this is true. Democracy has many iterations and many ways of existing. If you look at the Chinese system, you vote for your local representative and like that up the chain. But the Chinese government are the biggest pollsters in the world. So although the Communist Party, which is the intellectual vanguard that looks after the interests of the people, and you can see it now, 600 million people out of poverty in 20 years has never been done in history before. Now they're building maglev trains. They just got a 5 nanometer chip. They've just blasted a methane rocket into space. They have a different type of democracy. The leadership doesn't change, but the policies keep changing. Here, the leaders keep changing. The policies continue to benefit the same people who benefited under apartheid. So we need to actually wake up. We need to start thinking. Because really here, it's like there's no critical thinkers left in this country. I mean, it's like really, really crazy. So I'm very encouraged by places like the Sahel, where they're now starting between Mali, Niger, and whatever. They're starting to reclaim the history. They're kicking out France, and they're trying to build a different type of society. I think, one of the challenges for South Africa is that when we did get our freedom, China was looking like they're going to be hyper-industrial. Russia, the Berlin Wall had fallen. So it was only countries like North Korea and Venezuela and Cuba that were keeping that socialist flag alive or whatever. And obviously for us, we decided we're going for the Western capital model. But, I often think that had we stuck to the principles of the Freedom Charter, we would have been a outstanding moral beacon in the world. But we didn't have the courage. We didn't have the vision. We just believed all the stories that were told to us. And then this is where we've ended up. Really, at the end of the day, the negotiation at CODESA, It was just another phase of the same story that's been going on since 1652.
Mr. Minty, you raised some very, very pertinent points. We have unfortunately run out of time. But I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to speak to you about the book and your broader understanding of our sort of political society and the social spaces that we interact in and what needs to be done. And I hope that many people will be picking up copies of this novel. I know that the representative from OCAF told me we can get copies online at Clark's Online directly through them and through you. So I hope that lots of books will be sold in the next during the next year,
Inshallah.
and so, especially now that it's time to buy lots of holiday reading as well.
That's
Thank you
it.
so much for your time. Jazakallah
Shukran,
khair.
really appreciate it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Wa
barakatuh.
alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And that's it. You heard from Mr. Muhammed Yousuf Minty about In Search of Who We Are. Do get yourself copies from Clark's Online, OCAF, the Project Justice Trust, and the author himself. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.